questions or want to talk about your student or your child, just keep that in mind that this is being recorded. And it is also being translated simultaneously into Spanish, and we do need to choose the language. And if you can go ahead and go over those directions, Camelia, thank you.
Thank you. This interpreter is being interpreted between Spanish and English. So please, regardless of your language preference, please select your language by clicking the globe on the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the globe, you should see 3 dots, and then you can choose interpretation and then select your language. On your cell phone, you can also find the 3 dots on your screen. Select your preferred language and mute original audio. Este evento va a ser interpretado al español. Sin importar qué idioma prefiera, por favor seleccione su idioma haciendo clic en el globo de la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si no ven el globo, pueden también hacer clic en los 3 puntos, tanto en su computador o en su celular, y seleccionar el lenguaje preferido. Y por favor silencien el audio original. Muchas gracias. Thank you. You can assign me as the interpreter now.
So welcome to Transitions Tuesday. I am Laura. I'm one of the parent consultants here at Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. So tonight we'll have an introduction into transition programs and colleges supports for students with disabilities. In the future, we'll be hosting a more in-depth transition programs and college supports. And tonight we have with us Julia Ashworth, the coordinator of Riverbend Transition Academy, which is a college-based program. Sandra Finnimore, the manager of Project Search, which is a vocational-based program. And Jillian Sullivan, campus disability coordinator at the Connecticut State College, Asnuntuck. First, I want to briefly review what a transition program is. Yep. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So for transition services, Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act, it is the purpose of IDEA to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. And that is the key part of the legislation that involves transition services, is to prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. So IDEA, it defines transition as a coordinated set of activities, and it is the process of assisting the student moving from school to post-high school. Programs and services assist the student and their family in creating a vision of what life looks like in the future, again, in the areas of post-secondary education or training, employment, and if appropriate, independent living. Transition services are a facilitated movement from school to post-school activities, which could be continuing education, adult education, training, adult services, employment, independent living, and community participation. Activities must be based on the individual student's needs, factoring in their preferences and interests. And the activities could be functional academics, study skills, vocational skills, communication skills, self-advocacy, time management, organizational skills, and so on. So whether or not a student needs a transition program, it is a PPT discussion, typically in the senior year. The team will discuss if all academic requirements for graduation are met, what goals have been met, what future needs the student may have, or future goals. Again, in the area of education, employment, and independent living. I say that a lot. Transition services are only needed, so it's just transition services. That's it. It's not those services that are needed for graduation credit, such as a senior math class. The services do rather include acquiring the skills and academics needed to support their future life goals. And transition programs are based on the IEP, which are created from transition assessments, student input, post outcomes of goal statements, annual goals, and objectives. Transition services only must provide the student with the opportunity to be with their non-disabled peers about 80% of the time. Okay. And just to recap how it flows, you have the assessments, which are designed to determine the interests, strengths, and preferences needed relating to the employment, post-secondary education or training, and independent living. Transition assessments are used to develop the post-secondary outcome goal statements, the annual transition goals, which assist the student in acquiring the skills needed to reach their goals after high school. Okay. So that could be, so the assessments could be job shadowing, situational assessments, regular assessments, interest skills, inventories, job shadowing again. And they look at academics, maintaining employment, post-secondary education training. They could be activities of daily living, self-determination, technology, and so on, to name a few. Okay. And on the State Department of Education, there is EdSight. These are the directions to get onto the EdSight. I am going to attempt to go to EdSight so that you can actually see it. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. I can only see one, but I'm going to call you out, Julie. Can you see my screen with EdSight? Okay, excellent. Okay, so it's going to be in here. You'll go to overview, and you'll see find schools, and you'll see transition programs. Sorry, I'm scrolling really quickly. I'm sorry. And these are the transition programs, and you can filter it out. So in order to be recognized by the State Department of Education as a public transition program, and be a list on the EdSight, they must be a transition program operated by a public school district or regional educational service, located in a district high school, a high school campus, or a community location, and be providing to students between the ages of 18 to 22 years old who have completed academic credits towards their diploma, or students who are not working on academics and might not receive a regular diploma, that might receive a certificate of completion. And the students who have an IEP working towards those secondary transition goals and objectives. To be a transition vocational service provider, in order to be recognized by the state, they have to be a non-public organization that serves as a private provider to public schools, and hold a current valid contract as a vendor of the Connecticut State Department of Aging and Disability Services, the State Department of Developmental Services, or Connecticut State College or University, and they will be providing the transition services for that school district. And they again serve between the ages of 18 and 22-year-olds who have completed their graduation requirements, or students who are younger than 18 who are still in school. It might be a related service on their IEP. And so that is just a very quick, brief overview of what transition programs are. And this lists all the towns and different transition programs. Okay. I'm going to reshare my screen. Okay. Okay, we're going to try this again. Again, I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. Okay. And can everybody see my screen? Just a thumbs up if you can. Okay, excellent. Okay. And now I will turn it over to Favarh and Julie.
Thank you. All right, my name is Julia Ashworth, and I am the transition coordinator for Riverbend Transition Academy. So we are from the ARC of Farmington Valley, or Favarh. Sandy and I have 2 different transition programs through our organization. Mine is college-based, where Sandy is work-based. So you want to flip our slides. So our organization is based out of Canton, but Riverbend Transition Academy is located at CT State Tungus Community College. So you can bring us to the next slide. Thank you. The point of our program, so we are a full community college immersion experience program. So 4 days a week, we are strictly at Tungus. We have a classroom at Tungus. Although our students don't spend a lot of time in it, we're very, very grateful for the space that we have, but we do encourage our students to be out with their peers, study where their students study. They spend a lot of time in the library, in the cyber cafe, which is another place to study, joining clubs. So we really do take advantage of all of the resources on the college campus. But we do allow them, as long as they meet the age requirements, to really get that college experience. So they do enroll for college credit. All of the classes that they take do get transferred onto a college transcript seamlessly. So they do receive full credit for all of the classes that they take. Our program does give academic support through the community college. So we do have staff through Favarh, but we are not paras. We help guide them through the resources available on campus that every other student has access to. We do help a little more on the back end with maybe some academics that is expected that they would have at a college level. So helping them with like grammar on a back end. We don't touch the assignments that they are working on provided by their professor, but we can give extra assignments and help in order to then carry over into their assignments that they are getting in their classes. But we also help encourage the use of tutors and the labs for help going to their professors' office hours, really understanding the academic supports that are on the college campus. We also provide support with the advisors and admissions, financial aid once they are ready. They would not receive financial aid while they're with us as transition students. They do not yet have their diplomas technically in hand. They do have to meet all of the graduation requirements, but we help them once they leave us to get the process completed on becoming just full Tungus students. We encourage our students to participate in clubs and activities with their peers, as well as we have an employment opportunity every week with a job coach, and I'll get into that when I talk about our schedule. As a transition program, we also teach a lot of transition and life skills, including self-advocacy on campus, at a job site, in any other aspect of life we can touch upon that, as well as linkages to adult services and what they qualify for. We talk a lot about transportation training, whether it's getting their license or their permits. The city bus does come to Tungus, so we do get to explore that, as well as independent living skills in their homes with their families, or if they have goals to move out and live independently with peers or by themselves, as well as having support. We do talk about what a transition out of a community college would look like. Do they want to go to a four-year college? What is their plan? We help them navigate all of that and really decipher what they want to do. Do they have high school diplomas prior to begin? Technically, no. The high school diplomas, the question was, do they have high school diplomas prior to starting our program? They have to meet all of their high school requirements. But in order for a district to fund the program, they hold on to it for their transition years. So they can walk with their peers, but the school will hold on to it from 18 to 22 or whenever they decide to leave our program. That makes sense? Okay.
That's going to be the same with mine as well.
I think the same for all transition, as long as it's being funded by their high schools. All right. Laura, if you want to go to the next slide. So a weekly schedule for our first semester, first year students. It's easier to lay out kind of what a week looks like. When students start, they only take one course for 3 credits. We always start with the same course. It's called College and Career Success, and it's a really good introduction to what TUNCSIS is. And it mirrors a lot of what our program helps them navigate. So the professors are walking them alongside how to use all of the resources on TUNCSIS, and then we can mimic that to help make the transition easier. So they would have class 2 days a week. They have time before class to prepare, read their emails, get into their blackboards and see if there's any new announcements. They would attend class. Our staff would be alongside them, getting to know what the class is like, reading their syllabus, getting comfortable with the homework. And then as we don't help them with their assignments, we can help with the executive function skills. So how to use their planners, how to stay on track, how to better organize their class material, and then study skills, time management, all of the hard parts of class that the professors don't have the time to teach is where we can help make that class easier. We have 1 day of transition lessons in which our staff do teach. So this would be the independent living skills. This would be financial literacy. We talk job development. So we, in the spring, will usually take them out to go get resumes or job applications and practice interviewing. And then the self-advocacy and the information on it. Adult agencies, we do all of that 1 day a week. They have a study day. Usually we sandwich it in between their classes in order to meet with their professors if they need it, go to tutors, learn how to manage their time while they're on campus. And then on Fridays, we actually take them in the community and we work 1 day a week with a job coach, and we have a variety of settings. Most of our job sites are located near our central office, so in the Canton, Avon, Simsbury area. If we have the staff and the flexibility, and we have students from other areas, ideally we would love to get them comfortable in their own community and a job that they could continue as they left us. But we spend a lot of times in retail settings, restaurants. We have golf courses. So a variety of job opportunities. Does Riverbend offer any social groups, occupational therapy? So we don't offer any of the occupational therapy, PT, speech. That does end with the schools once they start our program. But there is always support. We want to get them using the support that the college offers and support in their community. Life skill building, we do a lot of that in our transition seminar day. We call it Job Club. Job Club is more than just jobs. So we're kind of phasing that term out, but that doesn't.
Someone had asked if the student in a transition program filled out a job application, would they be able to say they have a high school diploma on their application? I do that. I definitely do. I think you do
Yeah,
as
we do
well.
too.
It's just kind of like a technicality. They don't technically have it in hand, but they've earned it.
Absolutely.
They just have to wait that transition year so they can get additional supports.
Thank you, Sandy.
There was one more. Does Riverbend, who is eligible? Only high school students locally.
So not necessarily locally, it would be an IEP team decision as to whether or not the school would want to outplace to a program like Sandy or Eyes. We have taken students that are not so local to the Canton-Simsbury area. The more local you are, we provide transportation, but if the IEP team and the school is on board and feel that it's a good fit and can provide transportation, then it's definitely up for conversation.
And this is one of the questions that I wanted to make sure we covered, so thank you for that. But additionally, if a district who currently isn't working with one of the community colleges or a college nearby, how would you suggest that they get in touch? Because your program's unique and they work with Tunxus, but there are several different colleges like Manchester or.
So if they were looking for our programs specifically, they would they could contact me. So our students, they are Tunxus students. They have to they have to get into Tunxus, but then they also have to Tunxus wouldn't be who they go through to get into our program.
Right.
So they would just contact me.
Through the local LEA. But what if a local school wanted to form a partnership? Would you have suggestions for that district, and would they be able to call you or?
Yeah, we could definitely talk about it. So there is currently a lot of new things going on with all the schools becoming one.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on, but yeah, we could
Right,
definitely
there's
chat.
a lot going on with legislation and transition in general. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. As far as our weekly schedules, being a transition program, we do have to hit 180 school days. So that we follow the Tunxus schedule for start dates. But then students don't get the full 4 or 5 weeks off in winter. We usually give them about 2 weeks of a winter break, and then we bring them back for just transition. This is when we can kind of do more of the fun. We take the bus out and go to lunch one day. We're actually going to meet with Sandy's program and do a cookie swap this year so that we can get more peer interaction.
We go to the mall and do scavenger hunt too.
Yep, we do scavenger hunts. And that also falls in May when finals end in early May. We go all the way until the end and finish up our transition. And in May, it's a lot more employment based for looking for summer jobs. So that's really the only difference. Information somewhere. I don't know off the top of my head what's in the Norwalk area. Our director is more familiar with the number of programs, so I don't necessarily know if there's a similar one in Norwalk. I know a lot of the colleges do have transition programs, especially the community ones. I know there is one out in, I believe, Manchester, but I'm not positive about Norwalk.
I would think your child's school should know if there's a transition program at a university near you.
All right. And I think I just have one more slide about eligibility. So in order to be eligible for Riverbend, the student needs to have a current IEP or 504. They have to be in their transition years, so between the ages of 18 and 22, and have met all of their high school diploma requirements. they have to be independent on campus, so they have to be able to self-administer medications and any personal care that they may need. They got to be motivated to want to be in our program, to participate in the transition activities and the classes, as well as following all the rules and expectations of being on the college setting. They also have to be comfortable being on the college setting with the 5,000 other students that are there. Although it's a very small school and our staff are everywhere, we really try not to be everywhere with them, so that they blend, it's their college experience, and they can make the most out of what they're doing. Yeah, so it's a really short synopsis of what we are. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, is there resources? So is there resources to understand available programs at community colleges and or public college? The EdSight that Laura showed at the beginning would probably be a really good resource to see what else is out there for community and public colleges. There's no 504 transition program. So any student with a 504 who would be interested could definitely reach out.
Would it be helpful if I read the questions so I can read the questions to you so I don't have to keep on stopping?
Sure.
So the question is, since there is no 504 transition program in the school districts, how do you connect with those 504 students and who would benefit from your program?
So the 504, can you connect with us? I'm not sure if I'm like, how do I reach out to them or how do they connect?
I would, there's a lot of word of mouth advertising that
Yeah.
we have going on. So our community in the Farmington Valley area is very, they like to talk about a good thing. So they share with their friends, and if they have friends or individuals who are on a 504 plan, they tend to reach out to us. And that is kind of how I think we connect with them. I think typically they wouldn't have a meeting necessarily to discuss it.
Yeah, it's on rare occasions that a 504 student, they may agree to provide some student services and connect with TUNCSIS or another program. But again, I would talk to the school district and talk to your 504 team and have that discussion.
All right, so I think it's my turn.
Yes.
My name is Sandy Finnimore. I am the project search manager with Favarh. Our program is based at UConn Health Center in Farmington. If you can go to the next slide, please.
There we go.
So Project Search is a unique 10-month school to work transition program that takes place entirely in the workplace. Interns participate in employment related instructions and are assigned internships in their 3 different departments throughout UConn Health. So in order, similar to Julia's program, you have to have completed all your high school credits and graduation requirements to be able to attend Project Search if you are a school student. You have to have a desire and interest to be independently employed to come to Project Search, because that's the whole point of our program. And you also have to have access to reliable transportation to and from work. Unlike Julia's program, we don't provide transportation. Transportation isn't independent, and the responsibility will fall upon the individual and the family. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So our curriculum is, we cover 9 different units, but our curriculum is very fluid and individualized to each intern. So some of the areas that we will touch upon will be working responsibly, self-advocacy, health and wellness, communication skills, technology, financial literacy. We do an email mentor program with United Healthcare. We've been doing it for the past 9 years. We're currently in our 9th year at UConn Health. Our program was the first in the state for project search programs. We've have a 98% placement rating for all the individuals that have come through our program. I've graduated about 60 plus individuals over the 9 years, and all but one has gotten employment. So it's a great program. UConn allows us in many different departments and throughout our curriculum. What I like with the curriculum, what I like is that flexibility. So we were in a daycare with one intern, and she didn't quite understand that when her manager asked her, does she want to go do something, that you don't say no. So our curriculum being flexible, we were able to create lessons around that. So we created some lessons to kind of teach her that skill, that your manager's just nicely asking you to go do something. The answer is not no. Another individual had some trouble with her nonverbal communication, her body language and what it was saying to other people. So then we created some nonverbal communication and body language lessons for that. You can go to the next slide.
And we do have a question about a private school does not offer a 504 plan, just a service plan. How would that work for applications? Do you have any private schools that
I don't think we currently have any private schools. It's not something I don't think we would turn down. I would talk more with our director, Tammy, and we can give her email address as well at the end when we put ours in the chat.
Great. Is Project Search program available at UConn Stanford campus?
I don't believe it is. I'm not 100% sure all of the sites. Our Connecticut quickly grew. As I mentioned, we were the first one and we did so well that DDS, so backing up, my funding sources include students, adults, and privately paying. So DDS supports and funds our program, schools fund and support our program, as well as people have privately paid for our program. So DDS is a big contributor and supporter of Project Search program. They funded to the licensing fee for a number of other sites throughout the state. I think there's about 15 sites across the state. I don't know where all of them are. Some of them are still in the process of opening.
Yep.
So I'm just not positive.
Looks like there's 14 currently.
14.
Yep, 14 currently.
So in our internship rotations, the interns will build communication and problem solving skills, as well as job specific skills through their work rotations. These are unpaid internships. Work rotations will begin the second month of program. So we typically will start the end of August and run through the end of May, beginning of June. And so their internships will start the end of September. They will go through 3 internships total. Each internship's about 10 weeks. Within their internships, they're going to work with their managers on scheduling details. They have to interview for each internship, so they're practicing interviewing skills. We also work with HR to do mock interviews. HR is our business liaison, is in HR, so we get very honest feedback. I've found that having high expectations of the individuals as they come into my program, as well as a non-sugar coated, very honest communication style with them has been very, very successful. All the interns like, as hard as it may be able to hear that you made a mistake, they like the honest feedback, and because it's never like you made a mistake and it's life's over, but it's you made a mistake and here's how we can fix it and here's how we do better next time. And they've all really liked that kind of style, which is unique and different than a lot of other transition programs that individuals may have gone through. You can go ahead to the next slide.
I did find a Project Search at Stanford. I'm going to put that in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So a typical day, the individuals, interns will be from 8 to 9 in our office, our training room, and they will learn employability and independent living skills From 9:15 to 1:45, they go to their unpaid internship. And from 2 to 2:30, we recap again the day in our office again. So this is again, what's unique about our program. With school internships, they tend to go for a couple hours a day to one place, 1 day a week. This will be 10 weeks, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day minimum of them doing the same job at the same location. So they really get to learn the ins and outs of the job. You can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, you can go to the next slide. So in order to be eligible for our internship program at UConn Health, you have to be at least 18 years of age. That is a UConn Health requirement. We're not able to accept anyone who's under 18. You have to have independent personal hygiene and grooming skills that are appropriate for the workplace, have independent living skills to include a lunch routine, and be able to maintain appropriate behaviors and social skills in the workplace, capable of accepting directions from their supervisors, be able to communicate effectively, have access to reliable transportation, because as I mentioned before, Project Search does not provide transportation, it is independent. We do travel training that typically takes place in the spring. If an individual is required to take the city bus to and from program in order to get to program, we will do travel training with that individual much sooner so that they're able to attend Project Search. You have to be able to maintain a minimum of 90% attendance. In my opinion, that percentage is low. It should be closer to 100. There's so much that we have to teach all the interns that I could teach them for years and maybe not reach everything. So it's very important that they're there every day to learn as much as they can. And the most important is they have to have a desire to work competitively in the community at the conclusion of their internship program. I think that might be the last slide. Yes. So Julia and I will put our email addresses, and I'll also put Tammy's email address in the chat. So if you have any questions specifically about our programs or the programs that Favarh offers, we can help you there.
Okay, thank you. And I will turn it over to Jillian.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Jillian Sullivan, and I am the Campus Disability Services Lead for CT State Asnuntuck. The Asnuntuck campus is located in Enfield, Connecticut. And one nice thing just to note as we continue the presentation is that with the CT State College merger, all of the disability services departments at the 12 community colleges are in lockstep with processes and procedures. So this information that I'm presenting would be applicable to any of the 12 community colleges in Connecticut. So we consolidated in July, we merged campuses, and so now we're all in lockstep. So there's not going to be different processes between campuses, which I think is pretty exciting. So the next slide, please. So just to discuss a little bit about what our objectives are for this evening, I'm going to be focusing on describing the process of obtaining reasonable accommodations at the college level and the steps to help prepare students. Understanding the differences between high school and college accommodations and supports for students with disabilities. So there are some big differences, but there's a lot of supports in place to help students make this transition successfully. Recognizing the differences between reasonable and unreasonable accommodations at the college level. And then also being able to have a sense of the type of documentation that's needed when students transition to the college level. Next slide, please. All right, so I have this in bullets, so you'll just need to click. So in high school, there's a big focus on progress, ensuring that students are making progress on their IEP goals, and then also setting them up for success in their classes. So students who are eligible for specialized instruction and services receive special education services through an IEP. And parents and caregivers are very involved with the IEP and 504 plan development. And the IEP remains in effect, or 504 from year to year. So for example, I was a special education teacher for the high school level prior to moving into higher education. So I would make sure at the beginning of the year that the students' teachers would receive copies of the IEP or 504 plan. And then teachers and service providers are responsible for implementing educational plans. And then at the high school level, assignments, assessments, grading, they can be modified or changed to meet a student's individual needs. And then parents and caregivers and teachers um, very closely monitor progress, grades, attendance, homework, um, making sure that students are staying on top of their assignments. Now, as students get older, they're generally more expected to monitor their own attendance, homework, grades, etc. However, coming from the high school, from my high school background, parents and caregivers and teachers really continue to more monitor closely these areas. Next slide. So in college, there is a change in what is being focused on for students with disabilities. So in high school, we were really focused on progress and setting students up for success. In college, students are granted reasonable accommodations, and the accommodations are designed to remove barriers caused by a student's disability. So, accommodations are designed to provide access to the requirements of a student's program, college program, but accommodations don't guarantee certain outcomes, such as good grades. So, when a student transitions to college, the student is responsible for all of their own educational decisions. So while parents and caregivers can give input, ultimately the educational decisions lie with the student. And then there's one big change that is challenging for families is that there's very limited communication with parents or caregivers. Now, students may opt to sign a form called a FERPA waiver, granting college personnel their consent to share information with third parties, such as a parent or caregiver. Um, Generally speaking, college personnel can listen to a parent or caregiver's concerns, but they can't share certain information, even with a signed FERPA waiver. It's pretty rare that faculty or staff members will discuss a student without the student being present. So we really strongly encourage parents and caregivers to communicate directly with their student rather than contacting college personnel directly. Right. So there are also no special education services in college. And I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. So students are granted reasonable accommodations, but there's no occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. So there's no special education services. And assignments and assessments, um, they can't be modified or changed. So students with disabilities have to complete the same assignments as their peers in their classes who don't have disabilities. They have to complete the same activities, same exams, same assignments. And so I had some families say to me, "Well, you know, my child gets assignments that are reduced in length. So if the class has to write a 10-page paper, my child has to write a 10-page paper." And I say, yes, they would have to write they would have to write a 10-page paper as well. And then students are responsible for attending class, completing their assignments, and monitoring their own progress. And it's what I would say is it's really important that students know that they have a disability, how it impacts them both in and out of the classroom. They need to know their strengths and weaknesses and which accommodations best support their learning. So that sometimes is a little bit of a challenge because I have had students enter college and their families don't want them to know they have a disability. And that creates a challenge because students are responsible for their own educational decisions when they start college. So that can be a challenge. So it's really important that students are educated about their disabilities and strengths and weaknesses and accommodations as early as possible. One large scale study that I found very interesting said that if the students don't know that specifically they have a disability, they are much less likely to even consider disability services as an option. Now, it looks like I have some questions in the chat. Um, so, um, so basically, all throughout their academic K-12, we are seeing these students setting these students up to fail in college. Well, I would say that the big thing is that there are resources for students to be successful, and disability services is one of those resources to assist them. All of the state community colleges in Connecticut also provide free tutoring for every student. We have guided pathways advisors to assist students with navigating the requirements of their courses and any challenges they may encounter. But the big thing is that it's up to the student to take those steps to access those resources. So we're available and we make sure students are aware. For example, I go to multiple first year classes in the fall to make sure students are aware of my department. And so we have these supports, but it's really up to the student to pursue these supports.
Right.
And
I'm
then
just- Oh, go ahead. I was just going to add something about the high school transition program, but go ahead.
And then just one thing is that a high school education plan, like an IEP or 504 plan, they're not valid or honored at the college level. And so that's something to keep in mind, is just because a student had a particular accommodation on their IEP or 504 doesn't mean that it's going to be considered reasonable for college. There's also no team meetings in college. So I've had a few situations where a parent or caregiver will contact me saying their student is struggling and they would like a meeting with all the professors, myself advising the student and the parents. And that's not really something that happens in college because of very strict privacy laws, that there's only certain pieces of information that we can have access to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's okay. Just going back to the question, basically they're setting students up for failure. That's why it's important to really talk to your team in high school and talk about the needs and the goals that your student has or your child has, and have a well-rounded transition program to help prepare them for life after high school.
And I see a question, aren't IEPs and 504s utilized to determine resources available to the college student? I will talk about that a little bit when we get to the documentation section. But essentially, I find that IEPs and 504s, I will take a look at them, I'll consult them just to get a sense of the resources students or services and accommodations the student did receive. However, what we're really going to be looking at more is actually the students' evaluations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that slide.
So on the IEP, do you just really focus on the accommodation page, what they received for accommodations?
So I'll definitely take a look at it for sure. But basically, what I'm really looking at actually, and I'll talk about that when we get to the documentation page, is that we're really actually looking at the evaluations conducted by the school. And we'll talk about that with documentation. But so I'll take a look for sure. It does give me kind of a sense, but there's oftentimes accommodations in high school that are not reasonable in college. So I do get a lot of questions about why there aren't IEPs or 504 plans in college. And so once a student leaves high school, whether they graduate or they end up leaving the public school system, the IEP or 504 doesn't follow them. It's not considered a valid. It's not considered valid in college, and it's because IDEA doesn't cover colleges. So once a student leaves high school, the protections from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act no longer apply. And then I often get a question, well, but colleges are covered by Section 504. Well, yes, but we're covered by a different subpart of Section 504 than high schools. And so basically, colleges and universities follow subpart E of Section 504, where high schools cover subpart D. So these subparts have different requirements. And so Section 504 at the K-12 level, they end at graduation, so they're not binding to colleges. And so basically, colleges are not required to honor high school 504 plans or create a new 504 plan. And colleges provide reasonable accommodations, but they do not use IEP or 504 plans. And so basically, what would happen is a student's instructor would just receive a letter saying that the student is registered with disability services and these are their accommodations. So there's no real plans in college. Um, Well, and so I see this great point that something like a calculator could be denied in college based on a professor's requirements. And I can certainly speak to that, is that there are some, if an accommodation is going to fundamentally alter what is being assessed or measured, then the accommodation may not be considered reasonable. So for example, I had a student who was taking um, a basic math class, and the instructor wanted to know and was assessing a student's ability to do basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division problems. So a calculator wouldn't be considered reasonable because the professor was really wanting to measure, does the student understand the process of completing these problems? So in that particular situation, a calculator wouldn't be considered a reasonable accommodation. But if a student is taking like a statistics class, then a calculator could be considered a reasonable accommodation. When that happens, it's actually up to the instructor to reach out to me and we discuss it. And I assess what is really being measured and whether or not the accommodation is reasonable and whether alternative accommodations exist to help the student in that capacity. All right, next slide. So there's also different roles in supporting students with disabilities in college. And so it's very different from a high school case manager versus a coordinator of disability services. So in high school, counselors, special education teachers, related service providers, they meet with students to provide services and monitor their progress. Okay. And so their role is to support students under their education plans in high school and to help set them up for success and progress on their IEP goals. And so in college, disability services coordinators, we have a very different role. And sometimes colleges use the title coordinator, accommodation specialist, access coordinator for these roles. And coordinators basically they coordinate accommodations rather than manage a student's progress like in high school. So, for example, disability services coordinators are not checking in with a student's instructors to check in on their progress and make sure that they're doing okay or monitor the effectiveness of accommodations. So, if there isn't a concern, it's really up to the student to contact disability services because otherwise if a student doesn't communicate to us we don't know that there's a question or a concern. But basically students are responsible for their own academic progress just like students who don't have disabilities. All right, so some reasonable accommodations. Extended time to complete exams, that's the most commonly granted accommodation. Students would either be granted time and a half, so 50% extended time, or double time. Large print materials, access to word processing software, captioning on their media, sign language interpreters. Having short breaks during class, audiobooks, and assistive technology. We do have several students who have access to text to speech programs or dictation programs, uh, preferential seating, access to a calculator. A reduced distraction setting for exams, and noise reducing headphones or audio buffers. All right, next slide. So these are some examples of accommodations that may be considered unreasonable at the college level. So open book or open notes exams, reducing the length of certain assignments, exams, or quizzes, unlimited individual tutoring. So colleges, as I was mentioning earlier, Connecticut State Community Colleges provide free tutoring for all students. And so students with disabilities have access to the same amount of tutoring services as every other student. Unlimited time to complete assignments or assessments. Students have deadlines that they have to adhere to. Providing the student with a list of missing assignments from the instructor. So it's really up to the student to be monitoring their own progress. Waivers for required classes. And so one thing I'll note is that sometimes high schools waive foreign language or math requirements based on a student's disability. But colleges, they have very specific requirements, and granting waivers for certain classes, especially if it's required for a major, would be something that isn't commonly approved. So it's very common that a waiver wouldn't be granted, even if the student wasn't required to take, for example, a foreign language class in high school. Ungraded exams or exams graded on a pass-fail basis, lowering passing scores, retaking exams for full or partial credit, and communication with a student's parents or caregivers about their student's progress. So this is a little bit about the process of obtaining accommodations at the college level. So the first step for students is that they have to contact my office and they have to self-disclose that they're a student with a disability. So if a student doesn't contact my office, I won't know. So it's up to them to take that initial step. And that's often one of the more challenging steps for students, is to take that first step and be able to self-identify and advocate for themselves as a student with a disability. Then Connecticut State Community College has an online system called Accommodate. It is a confidential data management program. And students would need to go into the website and create a confidential file where they would list their personal information. They would discuss their accommodations that they used in high school, accommodations that they think might be helpful in college. Additionally, they would be asked to describe their disability and describe how it impacts them both in and outside of the classroom. Then the student would provide disability-related information, which we'll talk about shortly. Once that information has been provided, a staff member will contact the student to schedule an intake meeting. And then during the intake meeting, the student will collaborate with the disability services personnel to determine reasonable accommodations during the meeting. And so we refer to this as the interactive process because it's a joint collaborative process between the disability services personnel and the student. So it's something that we work together on. And then with the student's consent, a student's accommodation letter will be sent to their instructors. So one thing to keep in mind, as I talked a little bit about earlier, is that a student has they don't have a plan. What they have is an accommodation letter. The accommodation letter doesn't list the student's diagnosis or any sort of personal information about them. That's strictly confidential. All the instructors will know is that a student is registered with Disability Services, and they will also know that, that they have these accommodations. So any personal information about a student regarding their diagnosis, whether or not they had an IEP or 504 in high school, testing scores, those wouldn't be something that a professor would be privy to. But if a student feels like they would like to self-disclose to an instructor, they're absolutely welcome to do so. Our instructors from my experience working at CT State, are very well versed, very supportive, and eager to help their students do well. in their classes. So I'm certainly happy to assist students if they choose to self-disclose to their instructors. And so documentation. So this is what we were talking about earlier when I talked about IEPs and 504 plans not being considered valid or honored in college. And so this is what we're looking for. And again, a student can provide their IEP or 504 plan. It provides supporting information. It gives me an idea of what the student was received in high school. But what we're really looking for are the reports from a student's triennial evaluations. So if a student, so the psychological evaluation, the achievement evaluation, any sort of related service provider evaluations like speech therapy or occupational therapy, that's what we're really looking for. If a student has a medical or mental health need, then we would be looking for documentation from a healthcare provider detailing some very specific information. So we would be looking to learn more about the student's limitations to major life activities, describing the impact of the disability in an educational setting, and making recommendations for possible accommodations. And so if your student goes to any of the CT state community colleges, we actually have a specific form that we provide students for their healthcare provider to complete. And I see there's some questions in the chat. So yes, all of these, that's a great question. So all of these processes and resources are the same for all community colleges in Connecticut. So we're really, with the merger, we're nicely in lockstep with each other. So what the process at Tungsas is going to be the same at Asnuntuck, Manchester, Gateway. So they're going to be the same processes regardless of the school you go to. So what percentage of first-year students need to take remedial math, reading, or writing classes? Well, so CT State is actually doing away with developmental classes. So at the moment, what we have is a student who requires some extra support will take a workshop class for some additional support, but they'll still be taking like English Comp 101. So they have the workshop class where they receive support for the English Comp 101 class, but they're still going to take English Comp 101. And then in terms of IEPs in Connecticut schools, how are disability services preparing for the influx of students needing accommodations? Well, so one thing we did was implementing the Accommodate system, which I was speaking to earlier about the data management program, which has really helped to expedite the process. So instead of using a paper file, students can just upload things directly onto the website. We're also really trying to do a lot of outreach to high school students and families so that they know the process. I've been doing quite a few presentations at high schools, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight so that we can kind of also help expedite that process for students. We also are really taking a very close look at our disability services departments and seeing if additional staff are needed. We're really taking just a very close look at the types of resources needed. And what's really nice is that we have a disability services council for all 12 of the community colleges. So we're meeting once a week and really monitoring what's happening on each of the campuses and whether additional resources are needed. And those are great questions. So we would also be looking for if a student has low vision or has a visual disability, looking for ocular assessments or a low vision evaluation, audiological evaluations or audiograms for students who may be deaf or hard of hearing. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, high school documents like IEPs or 504 plans alone are not necessarily adequate. So the student has to provide the documentation substantiating a disability. And I'll tell you, unfortunately, some of the things I've observed with IEPs and 504s coming out of some of the high schools don't list a student's diagnosis, don't have any of the testing listed. Accommodations are vague, so they're not providing me with the information that I need to be able to help the student. So sometimes the IEP as a document isn't often, it doesn't contain enough information that it should contain. Because as I was mentioning earlier, like I taught special education for 14 years. I wrote IEPs, hundreds of IEPs over the course of my career. And some of the things I saw with just the lack of detail and lack of information, I was a bit alarmed about. So that's one of the other reasons that an IEP or 504 may not be adequate. And so just talking about self-advocacy is parents and caregivers I recognize have been advocating for their child for years. One of my dear friends, her son is starting college and he had an IEP through his academic career. And, she said she's feeling really anxious about it. And so to prepare, one of the big things I would emphasize is encouraging active participation from your student in their IEP or 504 meetings. So I heard this great analogy from a colleague of mine. If we think about IEP meetings and college intake meetings, is that at the high school level, if we think about an ice cream sundae, oftentimes the parent or caregiver is the ice cream and the students are the sprinkles. And so the student is sprinkling in their feedback, but the parent or caregiver is serving as the main dish there. In college, what we want to see is that a student is the ice cream and the parent or caregiver can offer their feedback and be the sprinkles. So that's a really big important thing, is to really support your student in participating in their IEP or 504 meetings. Raising disability awareness. There's been so many students I've seen who don't know that they have a disability, don't know what their disability is. And one thing that can actually be difficult sometimes is when I'm in an intake meeting with a student and I ask them for their strengths and they don't know their strengths. And that is really, really difficult. They're just like, I'm not good at anything. So that's something that helping them understand themselves as an individual is really important. Fostering independence. So one thing when I was teaching special education is, instead of emailing a student's teachers if there was a problem, I would guide the student to email their teachers. So this is some practice that parents and caregivers can work on now with their student, is making sure that your student is, if there's a problem, kind of taking ownership for their education and working on problem solving and increasing that level of independence. Embracing mistakes. Mistakes are part of learning. I know that a lot of times parents or caregivers, they don't want to see their student not be successful, so they sometimes kind of dive in and try to save the day, which is completely understandable. You want your student to be successful, but in college, the student really needs to take their own ownership and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And then also helping students understand any sort of natural consequences, or if they do or don't fulfill their responsibilities. So I would just like to, I know you've been asking questions throughout the presentation, but if anyone has any additional questions, I would be happy to answer them.
No questions? No. Jillian, if you can put your contact in the chat, that would be lovely.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just say that regardless of where your student decides to go to college, you are always welcome to drop me an email. And I am happy to offer my advice or thoughts or access to resources to support you.
And I do believe I have the flyer, and I'll drop that in the chat. Okay. If there's no questions, we thank you for attending with us and being patient through our technical difficulties and glitches. I do appreciate that. And again, we will have more information on transition programs and college disability services as we go forward. Okay, so stay tuned. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for presenting. Appreciate it.